when opening a session, I normally start when somebody walks into the door. The first thing that I do is I greet them and I ask them if they have an appointment, and I ask if what their name is. I've been trying to make sure that I ask if I can help them instead of if they have an appointment. But if they have an appointment and I know that there's an appointment coming in, I'll try to say, like, hey, are you Kayla? And they'll, probably say yes or no, depending on their gender. Then I help them log in. So I get up and go to the kiosk, and as we log in, that's really where the session starts. I talk to them about if they have a draft, if they have reading that they want to work on, if they're just generating ideas, and that helps us figure out what the reason is going to be. And so by starting my session at the kiosk, I'm able to learn what the student wants and needs and is visiting for. And then when we get to the table, I ask to see their writing center reflection if they have one, or I ask if they need one. And we talk about what they want to work on in their session, that very first question. If they don't know what they want to work on, then that's where we start figuring out what they want to work on. But generally, at the kiosk, they've already established that a bit. Okay, so an awkward opening. Before we had the Writing Center kiosk, a student came in for help with a SHEM assignment, and they asked me if I could edit their paper for them. I was trying to be funny, and I'm like, oh, you can't afford me. And so they packed up and started to leave. And the student whose first language was in English, they didn't understand, they started to leave, and I really had to spend a lot of time in our session just assuring them that, like, I am willing to help, I am here to help, and that I could be helpful to them. I learned something really important, and it's that humor is not universal. My attempts at jokes can really break down a session, especially in the beginning. Instead of assuming a student understands, like, the difference between revising and editing, now I just go with whatever they say. So if they say, I want help editing, I'm like, great, let's talk about what you want to do. And then we get into what kind of help they need. And generally it might be higher order concerns or lower order concerns. It all depends. But I just accept their language. And then I ask for clarification so that way I'm meeting them where they are. Essentially, I just learned that listening to students is way more important than making assumptions. So the jokes and assumptions just helped me establish myself as somebody who knows more than them, but not somebody who's willing to help them. So it didn't engage the peer relationship that I wanted to have.
So every time a student walks into the center, I kind of like to watch their whole login process and see how they answer our general questions, like, have you been here before? Do you know how to sign in? Or do you have an appointment? Just because if they hesitate or kind of stutter over their answers, it's kind of an indication that they may not completely understand your question. And so that's also an indication of English being a second language. So if they have no problem getting signed in and they are understanding well, then obviously I like to begin my sessions with a very broad, what are we working on today? And I feel like that question just kind of helps me to get an understanding of how well they understand their assignment and how they feel about it. But that very broad question doesn't always work with ESL students, just because they don't know where to start and they don't completely understand what you're asking. So if I notice that English might be a second language from the second they walk in the door, then I know that I should phrase my initial what are we working on today to something a little more specific, like what class are you here for, what assignment are you here for, do you have any main concerns you want to look at? And so breaking that question down helps them to better answer the questions, and so then I can best help them instead of just asking them a super broad question that they don't understand.
Alright, so opening a session. When I open a session, the first thing I do is introduce myself to the student, and I also try to get their name. I feel that it's not only more professional, but it helps the whole session feel more personal and friendly. I also ask them what their assignment is, what class it's from, what they're writing about, and what their concerns are about, so I get a sense of what to work on during the session. Now, awkward sessions. Okay, the only awkward experience I've really had was this one with an awkward opening. It was my first session being shadowed. The student came in with a MacBook, and I introduced myself. I gave my usual introduction, and then he turned on his laptop. And then I was like, "Do you have your assignment printed out?" And he was like, "No." And I told him he could print it off if he so desired, but he just kept using his laptop, and it got kind of quiet and awkward. And so I tried again, asking him, "Would you like to print it?" And then, and then he was like, kind of like, "No, I'll just use the laptop." And then I got really timid, and all I could really say was, "Oh, okay," And we ended up, another tutor, the one that was shadowing me, ended up stepping in, and they specified that we usually like to work off a printed copy. So we tried printing, and it didn't exactly work, so they ended up just leaving. So it was kind of awkward. Now, what did I learn? I learned from this experience that in this profession, you cannot be timid with a session. I should be able to speak comfortably and let students know how the session typically works. It's not me being bossy or demanding. It's just procedure stuff. It's just how we prefer things. And it's totally okay to just state that. So also, I learned that Dr. April prefers when we work off printed copies, so that's usually what we go to. It's okay to work off computer, but usually we work off printed copies. So that's what I learned. So it encourages engagement, and they can look back and see the changes they made.
And ever get over it. So when I typically open a session, I begin with asking the student how they're doing, how they're feeling about their classes, their assignment, their teacher, if they're having a good semester. I really like to just make that kind of personal connection first thing, and then I will use that to lead into what they're wanting to work on. What class is it for, what the specific assignment is, what aspect of the assignment they're wanting to focus on. The most awkward opening of a session that I can think of was actually just a few weeks ago. I had this young man come in, and within the first 10 minutes, he had basically spilt his life story, telling me that he had high-functioning autism, he had ADHD, he hadn't taken his ADHD medication that morning. It was such an incredibly awkward session. I could not get him to focus. And then he handed me his outline instead of his assignment. But from that session, I'd already kind of started learning how to be more directive with students, but from that session I really learned, sometimes you just have to be blunt and say, "Hey, focus."